George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Joe Biden literally falls asleep in the White House, in the Oval Office, in front of the Israeli President Herzog. Let's hope he didn't sleep talk us into a new Middle East war. But the banks in Britain are waking up to a campaign of astounding success centered on NigelFarage, the leader of the Reform Party and the man who did more than anyone else to bring about Britain's Brexit from the European Union. Coutts and co, bankers to the Queen, bankers, I said, part of the NatWest Group, 40% owned by the British public, turn out to be expelling people from their bank based on their values and how they synchronize with the values of bankers. Values? Bankers? It's all coming up over the next couple of hours. The GrainDeal, the attack on the KerchBridge, terrorism, the blockade of Odessa. The war drags on, even though Joe Biden is by now sound asleep. Well, it is the middle of the afternoon in the United States of America. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night, as Betty Davis once said. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
4 more years or 40 more winks. It was unbelievable, the scene, even by Joe Biden's recent standards. There he was, the president of Israel, America's closest ally, right at the center, always, of the possibility of war breaking out right across the Arab and Muslim world. Israel, there presumably for more hundreds of millions in subvention, were treated to Joe Biden's snores instead. He literally fell asleep while talking. No mean feat. He cannot possibly be the candidate. He's not running. He's not spending any money as the nominee. He hasn't got any staff on his presidential re-election bid. He cannot be serious, as John P. McEnroe would put it. Another 4 years of Rip Van Winkle. Mind you, the way things are going, you'll be lucky to see the end of the summer. Not only is the net closing in on his own corruption, but the destruction of the character of the son who's always with him, who seems to have the free run of the White House, even the Situation Room, where nuclear war might one day be launched, maybe sooner than we think. The Hunter Biden story is now turning from lurid to XXX-rated pornography. Marjorie Taylor Greene has just been holding up large laminated pictures, sex pictures, of the presidential son who flies on Air Force One, who can come and go into the Oval Office as he pleases. He's now the subject of not one, but 2 IRS whistleblowers who recommended that he be prosecuted in the most severe way possible under IRS regulations. But he was protected by the FBI and by the Justice Department, laughingly called. The fact that he was going to walk free without not so much as an electronic tag for offences, gun offences, tax offences that have put other people in jail for years, turns out only to be the tip of the iceberg. The IRS wanted to prosecute him for charges on charges that would have put him in prison for many, many years. The fact that the FBI and the CIA and the Justice Department are standing sentinel, locked together around the Biden crime family, may well turn out to be the end. Either the end of this presidency or definitely the end of another second-term bid by Joe Biden. And no matter what they do to Donald Trump, well, his popularity keeps going up. They've indicted him now again in connection with the January 6th rumpus. It would have just been described as a rumpus in Europe. Compare it to France, for example, and would have been forgotten about by January the 8th. But the Yanks are still fixated on it and still indicting their former president around it. But what happened when they announced this latest indictment, bringing to 74 the number of felony charges that Donald Trump now faces? The opinion polls showed a rise in Donald Trump's popularity. So it doesn't look to me that anyone on the Republican side could even dream of stopping Trump, or that anyone on the Democratic side will be able to stop Trump running for president. And I know a record number of people, 81 million no less, voted for Joe Biden in the last presidential election, but nobody will believe any concocted, rigged election that puts Joe Biden back in the White House. So what is the deep state going to do about it? I'll be asking Gerald Celente, one of the wryest commentators in the United States, about that later in the show. But let me turn to a more British story, although it's a story that may well be applicable across the Atlantic and even across the world. NigelFarage is no political buddy of mine. Our views coincided over Brexit, and we worked together and we won. And I will never resile from that or be in any way embarrassed about that. It was a truly epic victory led by him in a referendum that never would have happened other than as a result of his Herculean efforts, derided, reviled, but ultimately triumphant. But he's no political friend of mine. But I immediately leapt into the fray when it turned out that his bank had cancelled his bank account. And I know what that feels like. Not personally, because I have never had a day's problem with my bank, the Bank of Scotland, with whom I have banked for almost 40 years. But other people close to me and other organizations for which I've worked, other campaigns with whom I'm associated, have had untold politically motivated problems with banks. But never did I imagine that NigelFarage, who is not a poor man, I'm sure about that, would be debanked, as we now must describe it, debanked by the Queen's own bankers, Coutts and Co., which is a very grand name and a grand old feature of British banking architecture, but was long ago taken over by the National Westminster Bank. Not so grand, not so historic. National Westminster was one of the banks that took Britain to the very edge of bankruptcy back in 2008. Too big to fail they were, so the state the taxpayer, the public, had to take them over and bail them out. And the state still owns 40% of the National Westminster Bank, which owns Coutts and Co., a royal subsidiary. Coutts and Co. took a decision, it now turns out, on documents legally acquired by Farage, on the grounds that Farage did not represent their values, and was associated with people and things that contravened their ethics, banking ethics, that he could no longer be a customer, even though he had plenty of money in the bank, even though his account had been administered by him absolutely properly and for many decades, even though there was not a scintilla of wrongdoing on the part of Nigel Farage. They unceremoniously kicked him out of the bank, holding a check that he could go and find another bank to deposit his holdings in. Now, I don't know about you, but if a bank kicked me out, I'd assume that no other bank would be in a hurry to take me, because on the principle that there's no smoke without fire, they would instantly conclude that Farage must have been up to no good. And that's precisely what the bank sought by subterfuge through its friends in the media, principally in the BBC, to imply or infer, certainly not to say, for that would be defamatory, wholly untrue, as it was and as it is now proved to be. In fact, Farage has now obtained a 40-page dossier in which the bank's executives debate whether or not to debank one of the most famous people ever in the history of British politics. In the course of that 40-page dossier, they mentioned Russia 144 times, Trump 82 times, Brexit 62 times, and LGBTQ+I issues 14 times. Apparently, Nigel Farage failed the test on all of those counts, even though he has nothing to do with Russia, has never had anything to do with Russia. His opposition, very mild and meek, milk and water opposition to Joe Biden's war in Ukraine, was enough to tip the balance. That and retweeting a joke by Ricky Gervais got Farage kicked out of the bank, saw him wandering the streets of London with his check, looking for a bank that would allow him to bank it. Now, of course, his friends leapt to the defense of the bank initially, though not today that the document has seen the light. They said that turned out that Farage just wasn't rich enough to bank with Coutts and Co. That was a lie repeated ad nauseum on the BBC and in The Guardian in particular. Both of them working out their animus towards Farage, not on anything to do with banking, everything to do with Farage and Brexit and their obsession, love affair with the European Union. The liars lied, but the truth, as always, in the end, will out. And Farage is lucky that it has won out already. He demanded a subject access report from the bank, and thus the 40-page dossier is now with him. And he's just promised in the last 15 minutes there's more bad news for Coutts and Co. and the National Westminster Bank and the banking community in general to be coming out tomorrow as a result of further whistleblowing and further investigation by Farage and people like me, like Andrew Neil, the right-wing, famous former BBC journalist who's been playing a leading role in unmasking the truth behind this scandal. Now, why do I dwell upon all of this? Most of you in the world have never heard of Nigel Farage and have no particular interest in his banking travails. But here's why you should. You see, it's one thing if you own a restaurant, taking the view that you'd rather not have Nigel Farage eating his way through a gourmet menu and choosing rather expertly, in my experience, from however an extensive wine list you may have. That arguably is your right. And Farage can go out and eat in another restaurant. But as even the British Prime Minister said today, banking was an essential service. Essential. In fact, it's legally protected in countries like Germany and France, where it is illegal to deny someone the right to open a bank account. And that's for very good reason. Because if you don't have a bank account, you might as well take a jump off the nearest bridge. Because you will not be able to work and live and pay bills in our 21st century society if you have no bank account. Moreover, people will conclude from the fact that you have no bank account that you must be a rum character indeed, to be shunned, certainly not to be employed, and not to be afforded any kind of credit, not to be allowed a mortgage, a loan, or any other kind of essential interaction that people have now in 2023. But here's the real importance. RishiSunak, who came to Farage's aid this afternoon, although Coutts and co have still not backed down, even with the Prime Minister, a billionaire, against them on this. RishiSunak, the WEF, the EU, the World Bank, the IMF are all headed firmly fast down the road towards the cashless society, the digital currency society. Can you imagine the power that would be given to the state and the banks if cash was no longer an option? If you could not buy a dinner in cash and had no bank card because the bank would not allow you to have a bank account, you would be up the creek without a paddle. And you might even starve to death. You would certainly struggle on a day-to-day basis with a level of social control exercised by the state and the private sector in a way that none of us could ever have dreamt of before, except in the realms almost of science fiction. We have to stop this journey in its track. Don't abolish cash. Don't allow them to abolish cash. If you do, you're handing them the power to strangle you, not just control your life, which to an extent they already do, but to strangle your very means of life up to and including the point that you may very well expire. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night tonight. It is the mother of all talk shows. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Here are the phone numbers to call if you want to comment on anything I say or anyone else says on the show. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's free of charge. You call us, we'll call you back. Won't cost you a penny. It's 08 081 96 5522. That's 08 081 96 5522. If you're in the US and Canada, again, toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. That's +44 203 966 2625. While I'm at it, let me take my hat off to the great people of Jamaica, where this week we are the #1 podcast on the island. I spent a whole hour playing Bob Marley and thinking of my late and great friend Brian Travers of UB40. He was a great lover of Jamaica. We're running a poll. Are you worse off than this time last year? I'm not sure who could possibly not be. But you can vote on my Twitter, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. 11,586 people have already voted. And it is yes, 85, yes, 81, yes, 81, yes, 83. But it's no, 15, 19, 19, and 17. I'd like you to call me if you are one of those who is not worse off than they were at this time last year. So get voting. You've got till the end of the show. Big events are taking place in the world, not just in the war between Russia and Ukraine, being fought the bodies of the Ukrainian people, but in truth, a proxy war, NATO, which in truth is the United States and the Russian Federation. One man who knows the world better almost than anyone else is former US intelligence officer and creator of one of the most priceless assets we now have online, the new Atlas, the one and only Brian Berletic. Brian, welcome back to the show. Let me start, if I may, with this grain deal. The hue and cry has gone up that Russia is going to starve the poor people of the world, which is, of course, an endless preoccupation of Western leaders, how the people in the poorest parts of the world are doing today. But that's not, of course, at all true. But explain, please, to the viewers, what is this deal? Why has Russia pulled out of it?
The grain deal was supposed to be an act of good faith by Russia to allow Ukraine to ship grain out of its ports, primarily Odessa. And this grain was supposed to go to countries in need, but it was not going to countries in need. It was going to Europe, so much so that several nations in Eastern Europe, part of the European Union, had to protest the amount of Ukrainian grain flowing into Europe rather than to these countries that now the UN says supposedly will be starving. And in addition to this, the grain deal and the corridor that it opened in the Black Sea was being used to carry out attacks by Ukraine and its Western sponsors on targets in Crimea. And it is suspected that this most recent attack on the Crimean bridge was a result of Ukraine abusing this corridor that was supposed to be used only to ship grain.
So Ukraine and its friends are seeking to contest in practice the Russian cancellation of the deal. I don't know who's going to ensure them, but they're threatening to sail ships into Odessa. I'm not sure of their fate there, but they're, in other words, going to challenge Russia. Can they meaningfully do that?
I don't think that they can. I believe that there's now going to be essentially a blockade, just as there was when the special military operation began in February 2022. I think the United States has openly said that they are not going to send warships in. I don't think anyone would be interested in doing that because that would be another step toward direct confrontation and possible war with Russia. And the whole point of fighting a proxy war at the expense of the Ukrainian people rather than at the expense of the US and NATO is to not actually get directly involved.
Now, you mentioned the latest attack on the bridge, which was wildly celebrated in Western Ukraine, even though the only casualties were a mother and father who were killed, leaving their 14-year-old daughter alive, but an orphan, and in serious condition in hospital. Russia called that an act of terrorism. It's difficult to call it anything else, isn't it?
It is difficult to call it anything else because the roadways that are part of the Crimean Bridge are strictly civilian, for civilian use. At one point, Russia was using the railway to move military equipment, but they haven't done that, to my knowledge, in months since the last attack. And besides that, even if this bridge was entirely destroyed, and even if Ukraine could somehow punch through the layered defenses in Zaporozhye, Kherson, and cut the so-called land bridge, Crimea would still be able to sustain itself. People have to remember that this bridge was built in 2018. The Crimean Peninsula joined the Russian Federation in 2014. So for several years, it existed without a land bridge and without a physical bridge across the Kerch Strait. And it could do that again. Both the military facilities in Crimea and the civilian population could be sustained by air and by sea, because that is how Crimea had sustained itself for several years.
It was a performative act of terrorism, wasn't it? It had no military significance. The casualties, as I've said, were a small family destroyed by this act of terrorism. There's no, in fact, the bridge is still open, it's still operating, just one lane that is inoperable. And as you say, there's now a land bridge to Crimea as a result of the liberation of that part of the Donbass. So it was a peculiarly performative act because, of course, it will surely be answered by Russia. What do you think they might have in mind by way of an answer?
It's really hard to tell. We've already seen very significant strikes, particularly targeting the seaports at Odessa, but that could have been a result of the grain deal collapsing and Russia's intent to ensure that no more shipping takes place since the deal was scrapped, basically. That may have been part of the retaliation. There might be more to come. After the last attack on this bridge, there was the attacks on Ukraine's power grid, and that lasted for weeks, months, and it did extensive damage. And I believe that Russia has many escalations already planned out, and they would rather not exercise these options. But as Ukraine carries out these senseless attacks, Russia has to respond in kind, or they will just simply embolden Ukraine to do this even more.
It foreshadows what I have thought and said from the beginning is a likely consequence of the war, the loss of the Black Sea to Ukraine. At the moment, Odessa as a port is now non-operative. But it can't be, I think, the Russian intention to allow business as was for Ukraine into the Black Sea, for that will always now be a point of vulnerability for Russia. So the liberation of the whole of the Black Sea coast, including, of course, the great Russian city of Odessa, must be one of the expanded war aims. And I may add, if you're going to do that, you might as well link up with Transnistria and liberate the Russian people there in Transnistria, who are subject to all kinds of threats. And indeed, the leader of the Transnistrian Communist Party was actually murdered this week because of his stand towards Russia.
Yes, I think that is a very reasonable speculation. That's all we can do right now is speculate. We don't really know what Moscow is thinking in terms of the greater plan, but that would make sense to, if it's impossible to take or unfavorable to take all of Ukraine, especially the most western parts of Ukraine, and at least take the sea coast, to deny them access to the Black Sea and leave whatever is left of this essentially NATO controlled, occupied Ukraine, leave that for the European Union, let that be a weight around their neck. And they've created it, and that would be very fitting. So I think that would be very reasonable, but we just have to wait and see if that does actually materialize.
Now, what's happening on the ground in the war itself along the front? Quite significant Russian breakthroughs, several kilometers in some parts. It looks like it's not just the Ukrainian counteroffensive that has faltered, and everyone now acknowledges that it has faltered. Even the New York Times, even NATO acknowledged that, but that the Russians are making a counteroffensive of their own.
Yes, that's true. This was supposed to be a massive Ukrainian offensive. It was supposed to sweep southward through Kherson and Zaporozhye. It was also aimed at the Donbas region. There was even the slight possibility in their minds that they could take back Bakhmut. And what happened instead is now in the east, Russia is on the offensive. They are taking territory there. The offensive for Ukraine has failed in the south. We saw the New York Times admit that 20% of the equipment transferred over to Ukraine was lost. And if that's what they're admitting, one wonders what the actual number is. And then what is the number of manpower lost in this offensive? Because after the breakthroughs with the equipment failed, they began just sending infantry on foot to try to break through the Russian lines. And there have been massive losses for Ukraine. Now, Ukraine still has a large amount of offensive potential left. Russia has layered defenses both in the south and in the east, specifically to give way, absorb the Ukrainian offensive when the full weight of it hits their lines. And so they may still make a breakthrough, but the most important thing to keep in mind is that time is not on Ukraine's side. The numbers are not on Ukraine's side, no matter where this offensive ends on the map. Even if they were to take Bakhmut, even if they were to break through the south, wherever their military stops, it'll be utterly exhausted and NATO lacks the capacity to replenish it.
That is, in a way, and I see in the Daily Telegraph today in England, that's, if you like, the subplot of the war. That not only has Ukraine and its soldiers have fought very bravely and sacrificed enormously, but proved, as we all knew would happen, incapable of fighting and defeating Russia. But the subplot is that the military-industrial complex in the NATO countries, including in the United States, is simply not up to the task of a war with Russia. In fact, they're quite lucky that Russia will probably stop at the Dnipro, because they could probably go all the way to Berlin, given the current state of the armories and the ammunition dumps of the NATO countries.
That's true. The West collectively has neglected their military-industrial output. They have spent decades pursuing these smaller wars against developing nations. We saw these wars unfold in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. The United States is still engaged in a lot of these places. Their military-industrial complex is geared toward profit rather than any sort of purpose. They want to maximize profits, and maintaining massive capacity is not profitable. On the other hand, Russia inherited a massive military-industrial capacity from the Soviet Union. Not only did they maintain it, but they modernized it, and now they're expanding it. And this is something that takes years to do. This is something that the West now realizes they have to do, but they simply don't have time. They're talking about expanding production for their artillery shells by 2027, but when you actually look at the numbers, even when they do that, if they do that, it still will not be enough to sustain the daily rate of fire of Ukrainian forces now, which is still sometimes 10 times less than what Russia is firing on the battlefield. So this is an unsolvable problem, and this is why we see the West and also Ukraine focusing on basically PR rather than on sound tactics and strategy on the battlefield.
On the other hand, Brian, are things beginning to brighten up in Sino-US relations? One saw Janet Yellen, on magic mushrooms or not, kowtowing to the Chinese minister 4, 5 times. And to me, as an outsider, and you're living and working in the region, there seems like a slight thaw in US-China relations. Have I got that wrong?
I would like to believe that there was, but unfortunately, this fits a pattern the United States has followed for many years, where they pose as pursuing diplomacy with their adversaries while behind the scenes continuing to provoke them. And then when their adversary reacts to those provocations behind the scenes, they say, aha, see, we tried diplomacy, and they are intent on aggression. So now we have no choice but to pursue more sanctions and more aggression and possibly even war. They've done this with Russia. If people remember, then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the reset button she gave Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Or if we remember the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal, these were all facades the U.S. created to appear to pursue diplomacy, all while preparing the dagger of betrayal. And I believe they're doing the exact same thing regarding China now.
Now, Brian, finally, one of our legends, Simon in Florida, asked me to ask you about PETA in Thailand. I have no idea what he meant, but maybe you do.
PETA is the name of the most recent U.S.-backed opposition leader. Actually, he's more of a proxy for the actual US-backed opposition leader, a billionaire named Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit. He's unable to run because of his legal problems, so now he has PETA as his proxy, and he's trying to become prime minister, and if he cannot, he will have US assistance in mobilizing violent mobs in the streets, once again, creating the same conditions we saw in Ukraine in 2014 or Libya and Syria in 2011. This really is just one playbook the US uses everywhere. And the reason the US is interested in Thailand is because it has such a close relationship with China, and the US wants to install a client regime that would put an end to that or even reverse it.
Well, a big thanks to Simon in Florida, but an even bigger one to you, Brian Berletic, as always, the master of the new Atlas. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Much obliged to you. Are you worse off than you were this time last year? Answers, please, in our poll on Telegram, on Twitter, on the YouTube community, and the YouTube stream. It's not changing. It's overwhelming. But there's still a substantial number of people who are not worse off than they were this time last year. I really would like to hear from them. After the break, I'll be right back. I get a lot of abuse from people in America that don't listen properly. They imagine that because I am viscerally hostile to Joe Biden and the so-called Democrats, that means I'm a supporter of the Republicans and of Donald J. Trump. Neither of those is true. I'm not with either of these two big parties, two cheeks of the same backside. Even if we could agree which was the lesser attractive cheek, I still wouldn't be prepared to choose between them. I'm one of those that calls on, let me do so again here now, my good friend Jimmy Dore to run as a third-party candidate for the People's Party of America, for a third force to emerge. That's what I want to see in America, and I'm more than happy to give whatever advice and experience that I myself have to any people of goodwill who want to build that third force. As I've said before, if my good friend Dr. Jill Stein were to be the Green Party nominee again, I would, of course, support her for President of the United States. If Tulsi Gabbard would run as an independent presidential candidate, I would support her. I would not be happy to see Donald Trump back in the White House, but I'd be very, very happy if Joe Biden wasn't. I'd be very, very happy if Kamala Harris wasn't, even if that meant that Donald Trump would have another term as President of the United States. You see my point? I regard the US Democrats as the greatest threat to peace on the planet. I believe that the world is much more dangerous with Biden and Harris and the Democrats in power, and therefore I'd be happier if anybody could replace them as President of the United States. Doesn't mean I've become a Republican, at least not a US Republican. It doesn't mean I've become Trumpist or a devotee of the great orange Hulk. I'm not either of those things. But I've got to tell you, I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are a clear and present danger to the American Republic. And even more importantly, from my point of view, they're a clear and present danger to the peace of the world. Avoid World War III. Get rid of Joe Biden.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
A big thanks to my new patrons. If you really want to help me, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. New patrons to announce tonight: Rolf Moore, Jed Barahal, my good friend Guillaume Rivaux, the great French actor, Grant White, Mishiro Iwanaga, and a new Moats graduate in John Zitting. Many, many thanks to you all. Phone numbers again: 0808 196 5522 if you're in the UK or Ireland. If you're in the US or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Women callers are prioritized. First-time callers are prioritized. A first-time woman caller, of course, will go more or less immediately onto the air. Pedro Wright says, greetings from Paraguay. Wow, thanks, Pedro. Great job, George. I've been watching your shows for quite a while now. Keep it up. If God spares me, I shall. Pedro, thank you. And an email from Tony. Our email address is onair@moats.tv. George, the Ukrainians are crying about the Odessa port being obliterated. What did they expect after carrying out terrorist attacks on the Kerch Bridge? Karma, says Tony. Let's go to the lines. Raphael in Vermont is on the line and now on the air. Raphael, what would you like to say?
Hey, Georgie, how are you? Thank you for taking me. Georgie, I want everybody to understand one thing. When people gonna say big thing, they don't make noise. They just say it softly. And I think people in the world, because of the tone of his voice and the way he talked today, people do not understand the magnitude of what Putin, the actions Putin took today. Today, NATO, Article 5, all of these things are void because this guy stood up today. He said, as of midnight tonight, the Black Sea is off limit for everybody. Any boat, civilian or military, if you enter the Black Sea, Russia will consider you as enemy and hostile, and we will take you out. It's not like, I want people to understand, it's not like when Germany declared war to Russia. It's not like when United States in World War II declared war to Japan. It's not like that. This man literally just declared war to NATO and to anybody. I just want everybody to understand that. Thank you.
Well, a very, very powerful point, Raf. As I pointed out, rather more prosaically, nobody will insure any ships sailing to Odessa now in any case, and ships cannot sail without insurance. The loss of one of these ships, uninsured, is simply unbearable, and the only alternative would be American warships, and the Americans have said that they will not send them. British warships would be an option, of course, except we don't have any British warships. Here's an email. Sleepy Joe running as the Democratic primary candidate for the US 2024 presidency. I'd rather put my money on Oscar Pistorius without the stilts winning that race, George. That's from Timothy. Let's have a look, shall we, at the video of Joe and the President of Israel. It's worth a watch, you know.
At a political level, and Aqua and Paul Schramm. Yes. And as I affirmed at a political level, and Aqua and Paul Schramm. Yes. And as I affirmed.
It's not just that he fell asleep, it's that he kept on talking while he was asleep. God knows what he said. How can the fate of the Middle East be in the hands of this fool man? Sean in Stevenage on the cashless society. Go ahead, Sean.
Hey up, George. I trust you're well. I do like your monologue on the cashless society. I wholeheartedly reinforce that message. And not only that, the corollary of this is the central bank digital currencies, which are alarming in the most extreme degree for anybody, especially the working class, who values their freedom of expression, their freedom of movement, their freedom to dissent, their freedom to wage bargain collectively, and their freedom to express themselves and their opinions where and when they like. This is nothing less than handing over control, and this is throughout all the countries which are looking at central bank digital currencies. And many of them are. You can easily go online and have a look at a list of them. The Bank of England is advertising for people to operations, technical operations people and various other roles on their website. So this is coming. It must be resisted. This hands way too much control to people who are in bed with the powers that be, the establishment, particularly in this country, George. There's a revolving door between the political establishment and certainly the moneyed establishment, if you want to coin a phrase, and the people that are supposed to regulate them, the people that are supposed to oversee them and hold them accountable. This must be resisted. Just turning to the Farage thing quickly on the same thing. We think of the Canadian truckers who had all their accounts done when people tried to support them. Yeah. If anybody thinks this is going to be a good thing because it's convenient, it's not convenient for you. It's convenient for them.
That's very powerfully put, Sean. I couldn't put it better than that. Brilliantly expressed, and I agreed with every word of it. Another email into onair@moats.tv. Russia was yesterday condemned in the Western mainstream media for letting the grain deal expire and blaming them for those in impoverished nations facing hunger. Well, today Russia offered to provide the grain for free to the countries that needed it. I'm sure this won't be mentioned anywhere on the mainstream media. Regards, Enrique. Thanks, Enrique, and bang on, of course. Lance is in Canada on Mr. Prigozhin and the Wagner Orchestra. Always worth hearing, Lance. Go ahead, Lance.
Oh, I had said I wanted to talk about Zaporozhye. I don't, but I can talk about Wagner or what I think of it. But I always like to start with thanking you for at least half.
Thank you. Talk about what you'd like.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the first thing I'd like to tell a little anecdote. I had a dream the other day that I was traveling across country with Colonel Douglas McGregor. And I honestly had always thought that the first time I dreamt about another man, it would be about George Galloway. But I suppose I was in good company. Anyway.
I'm wounded.
No, I think as far as Zaporizhzhia goes, I feel like, well, I mean, the first part of the whole thing is in North America, they want to go to what's called a small modular buried reactor. So an element of that, I believe, was kind of taking the material scientists from Germany so we could build this. I personally believe this is poor thinking and an inefficient way to run nuclear reactors. But as far as Zaporozhye goes now, Zaporozhye is in a laid-up state, and it is basically not like Chernobyl. It is a solid unit. But my thought on it is that we are getting so desperate and showing signs of such desperation now that unfortunately, I believe at some point we're going to strike a fuel pool or something like that just to spread some radiation and cause some sort of justification for a NATO entry because, or at least that's what I don't know. It just seems like the desperation is getting worse and worse on our side.
I think that's worth fearing, Lance. But It's not something, in my view, that's likely to happen for this reason. I think that NATO no longer wants to join the war in Ukraine. It's not that there's a giant military industrial complex in the NATO countries bursting at the seams, the armories fully stacked right up to the roof, huge armies, navies and air forces in the NATO countries just itching to get their boots on the ground just in time for winter on the steppe in Ukraine. To be honest, that moment has passed. NATO no longer wants to be in this war. That's why Zelensky and the Ukraine project itself is beginning to be rubbished in the august columns of the New York Times and in the Daily Telegraph in England. That's why they are now predicting a military defeat, disaster, the Telegraph called it. But it's worth fearing, but not expecting, is how I would put that. Now, you can dream about any man you like. I know that I'm the man for you on Sundays and Wednesday nights. Gino is in the Bronx, another man, always worth hearing. Gino, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Galloway, good to hear your voice again. I've been listening all these months. I didn't want to take too much time up on the airways. When I realized how many people listen to you and how few get through, I backed away. So I stayed away. But I've been listening. I've been out to the gardens a lot. The cherry blossoms are gone. The magnolia trees are gone. The daffodils, the azaleas, the roses are just holding on. So I've been catching the show afterwards. But I got a phone call today from Gerald Celente, and he told me he's going to be on your show. I met him 3 months ago, or the second time I met him up at his anti-war rally. And I said, let me stay home and maybe I'll call in. So I got on again. So what I wanted to say is I heard what Seymour Hersh had said about, he has wonderful sayings about My Lai. He did the coverage, and he had the wonderful reportage on the blowing up of the pipeline. But when he crossed out of his particular domain of study and made a comment on Robert Kennedy Jr. and used the word kook, I really was offended, and I was very disappointed. Now, I know as well as you, even the prophets in the Bible, some days they're out of tune. They're not, they weren't Jesus. They weren't the Christ. But so obviously for me, Seymour Hersh was out of tune that day because he used as a defense that his daughter is a doctor and so forth and so on. Well, that doesn't hold a lot of weight with me because most doctors that I have observed are very responsible for much of the deaths that have been happening before the wars in other countries and the 6 million children who starve to death every year because we feed animals more than people and allow for the cancer to go up and heart disease. We have a number one doctor named Dr. Dean Ornish who's been reversing heart disease for the last 40 years with diet and stress reduction. Last year, 10 people needed a new heart. They didn't need it. You never hear him. You always hear Fauci. In England, you had a researcher showing the work of Dr. Joseph Issels in Germany, who was in jail for 5 years practicing holistic medicine, had almost a 16.7% cure rate with terminal cancer cases. And when he came out of jail, they had him head an alternative cancer clinic. Bob Marley went to him on a stretcher, came out playing soccer, still died because he blew out his lungs smoking those joints thinking there's a shortcut to God. Now, neither one of those two people are really much emphasized with cancer and heart disease, and that's killed more people than the virus and the wars put together. And yet, I would be curious to know if Seymour's daughter and the other in-law have ever led any kind of strike to bring health care to the Americans who don't have health care. And did they ever talk about the work of Dean Ornish and Dr. Joseph Issels, who are responsible for saving more lives in the two major fields of death with most of us? So that's that issue with that. And as far as it goes with what goes on in the world, with the depleted uranium sent to Ukraine, with your smiling, that smiling man Sunak over there. He looks like always smiling with all the debts going on, always smiling. What a psychopath. And as far as this nut job we have here with no brain, this elderly abuse of a president where we don't have anybody, he wants us to push for World War III and allow for what he called weapons of that are illegal and immoral to do send those bomblets. He wants to do it now. So my last point, if I may, we, all the people out there listening, we can speak out and we can hear about all these terrible things, but we have a responsibility ourselves to eat right, to meditate, to live a loving life and be an example and say prayers for George and Robert Kennedy Jr. and allow for the coming of the Messiah again as a small group 2,000 years ago. The Essenes, a very small group who lived their teachings, allowed for him to come in. It isn't darkness that brings the light. It's people who are holding to the good despite the odds and living and being fearless and loving and doing all these things. So, again,
Amen.
I'm watching you on the screen, but
hallelujah.
But
God bless you, Gino. I need to go to the break, but thank you for particularly those last words. I know that Robert Kennedy is under now vicious and very personal attack. Some of the most outrageous, outlandish lines of attack are continually being developed. But I've got to tell you, Gino, the thing that depressed me most, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s own Kennedy family are allowing themselves to be lined up to traduce, to insult, to defame the most illustrious of this generation of Kennedys. It is particularly repugnant to behold. And knowing the first generation of Kennedys as I do, and the closeness of their family, the idea that these nephews and nieces of that first generation should be viciously assaulting and completely distorting the point of view, the lines of their own family member is one of the most dispiriting of phenomena I've seen in the last week or two. God bless you, Gino in the Bronx. Coming up is the one and only Gerald Celente, the friend of Gino in the Bronx. Isn't it wonderful? We're going to get two New York accents in the same show. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. This type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Breaking news. Disorder breaks out in the House of Representatives after Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene displays of Hunter Biden having sex with hookers. The chairman tried to interrupt as Green said, Hunter Biden making sex tapes. Excuse me, this is my time, she said. And the chairman, Raskin, said, should we be displaying this in the august halls of this committee? Comer tries not to laugh. What a world we live in. The poll, 13,000 people have voted. The vast majority of you are worse off than you were last year. How could it possibly be otherwise? Now, one of my favorite guests ever on the Mother of All Talk shows is a man that wears a hat like me. He's Gerald Celente, aforementioned, and he joins us now on the Mother of All Talk shows. Gerald, welcome back to the show. I know it's not the wonderful, man. Wonderful. The Battle of the Hats. Battle of the Hats. Now listen, I know it's not the most important issue, but when the President of the United States falls asleep while talking to the President of Israel, you got to worry, don't you?
Oh, yeah, the guy's out of his mind, and it's been going on for a long time. And again, the only reason that that Trump won, that Biden won, is because people hated Trump so much, so they went out and voted. It wasn't like they loved Biden. And it's a freak show. But look at the freak show you got over there in the UK. From a clown that the best cartoonist in the world couldn't come up with a better one than Boris Johnson, to this arrogant little boy that you got playing the Joker now, this Sunak. And take a look over in France with the little Coutts Macron. It's a freak show everywhere you go. So, and the people just keep buying into it.
It is, but your freak is the most powerful freak, with the power to tell all the other freaks what they have to do. That's why we pay so much attention to the freak show in Washington.
Yeah. And that those little coward boys and girls across Europe bend over and suck up to a little jerk like that, and the morons that represent him show how low they can go. You know, you talked about Gino in the Bronx. You know, I'm a Napolitano. I grew up in the Bronx. And I was born in the Bronx. I grew up right after World War II. The height, I'm born in 46, the height of America. You were born to be free. You didn't take anybody's crap. Don't tell me what to do. I won't tell you what to do. Don't tell me what to do. That used to be the attitude. Not anymore. If you don't believe and swallow the crap coming out of the mouth of these little clown boys and girls called politicians and bureaucrats, why, then you believe in misinformation. You're only allowed to swallow government crap in a country near you. So going back to a clown out of his mind, father of a drug addict, that when Biden was playing senator, passed and promoted 3 strikes, you're out, the drug war that would have put a kid like his in jail for the rest of his life. That shows you what a crime syndicate it is. Oh, they found coke in the White House and they stopped looking to see what it was. There's a damn camera everywhere, every place, in every inch.
Powerful indeed, Gerald. Now, let's talk about the junkie son for a minute, the junkie gun-toting, underage sex-swinging son for a minute. Biden's never turned his back on him. Biden continues to back him and believe him. He's in and out of the White House, with or without his stash, at his own free will. He travels on Air Force One. He drives around in a pretty little green Corvette with the president. Don't you think the net is closing in on that crime family?
Yeah, it's yes and no. You know, it's the media that's in charge. And you look at the one that was the mouthpiece for him, Psaki before. Where is she now? She's became a prostitute with MSNBC. It's one big club. So as long as the media stays away from it, it goes away. It's what the media will create. And again, I write a magazine, as you know, the TrendsJournal. This is the October, when it used to be a quarterly, now it's a weekly, over 150 pages a week. This is about the United States overthrow of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine in 2014. The article, by the way, was written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. Now let's go back to Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, Christopher Hines of the Hines 57 family, the stepson of that another arrogant little boy, John Kerry, and another guy that I forget his name but's been convicted of a couple of crimes. They get on the board of directors of Burisma Energy in Ukraine right after the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych by the United States. What does this drug addict know about the energy business, or Christopher Hines of the Hines 57, the ketchup and the other stuff? What do they know about the energy business, and how come they're on the board of directors? You see what a crime syndicate it is? Morons and imbeciles call it a government.
It's powerful, Gerald, but we're edging towards despair. Let's try and look forward. They indicted Donald Trump again, and his popularity went up. What are they going to do next?
And that's what I said. As soon as, I'll never forget, when Trump got elected, and by the way, I'm not a Trump fan, just to make it clear. I'm a trend forecaster. I look at things the way they are, not the way I want them to be. In the TrendsJournal, in the May issue of 2016, we said that Trump would defeat Clinton when all the polls show the opposite. Now let's fast forward. He wins the election. The day after the election, the headline story in USA Today, new president comes to office, I forget with how many lawsuits against him. So it was negative from the start. Then they made up Russiagate. Totally fabricated. Again, it's a crime syndicate. And the crime syndicate now in charge is the military-industrial complex. The neocons are in charge. Again, you read this article, this is when Obama was president, Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State, passing out cookies and cakes in Maidan Square over there as the revolution's going on in Ukraine. And now she's a primary war hawk in the Biden administration, along with that other little arrogant clown boy. I went to Dalton. Don't you know who my daddy is? I went to Harvard. Those kind of people that are much better than us. Anthony Blinken, the Anthony Blinken that loved every war that America's started, went over to Saudi Arabia under Obama when he was Undersecretary of State. Obama, the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner, goes over to Saudi Arabia when they started the war that's killed almost 400,000 Yemeni people, over half of them children. Blinken went over there to give them intelligence as the United States is refueling the Saudi planes so they could keep killing the Yemeni people. Those are the people in the Biden administration. It's not Biden that's running the show. It's the military-industrial complex. It's the out-of-their-mind demonic, satanic people that love war and killing that are in charge.
If I'm right, Gerald, no Republican stands a chance against Trump for the nomination. And if I'm right that these indictments, this strategy of criminalization, much of it coming from New York, by the way, is actually not harming, but it may be helping Donald Trump to be reelected as president, I still feel that something has got to give, because I don't think they can afford a vengeful Donald Trump coming back to office. I can only imagine. I mean, talk about lock them up. I can only imagine who he's going to lock up next time. So what do they do? How do they stop him?
It's simple. You have to look at the other. Yes, Trump has a high popularity rating, but then you have to look at the other polls. The people don't want Biden or Trump. So what they're doing is they're telling you the polls if this against that. No. You have to look at the other polls. And the other polls show they don't want any of them. And that's why I think, but again, it's going to be a wild card. RFKJr, to me, is the best bet. And the reason, but again, they're going to keep going after him on this anti-vax thing as they keep going after him. And as I keep telling them, stop talking about this. You know, there was a line under the Clinton, when Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992. Behind the scenes line in the campaign was, quote, "It's the economy, stupid." That's what you have to focus on. You have to focus on the issues that hit the people in their pocketbook. Get away from this vax stuff, because that's all they're going after him for. This guy has the name and the background. And you mentioned before about his family coming out after him. You know, one of the things I say, you want to know why the world's so screwed up? Take a look at your family. You don't have to look so far. So anyway,
well, I've
go
got
back
a
to
fantastic family, but he doesn't appear to. I mean,
most families
they're actually rats. They're attacking their own family member, like Pavlovian dogs, at the behest of what? Joe Biden?
Again, you know, it's the mentality. And so the people looking for something new. Again, I do polls, I do data. You know, that's what the magazine's about. You go back to the midterm elections. The reason why the Republicans didn't win bigger, again, it's not what you want, what you like, or what you believe in. It's the facts why, is because a lot of young people went out to vote because of the Roe versus Wade issue, the abortion issue, which the Republicans supported anti-abortion and the Democrats said no. That's why the Republicans didn't win big. So going back to the data is showing that young people don't want to vote for Biden in the Democratic Party. So they'll go another way. And then you have a big independent voice. So if this election is done properly, I believe that RFKJr could win. I don't want to have it right here in front of me, but had I known we'd be talking about this. I began my career at a graduate school, making a long story short. I worked on political campaigns in Westchester County in New York, which is the richest county at the time back in the 1970s. A guy ran for mayor in Yonkers, which is a city of over 200,000 people. Angelo Martinelli became the longest running mayor. I worked on district attorneys, senators' campaigns, Congress. They sent me to Albany. They were grooming me. I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate. I designed and instructed America's first course called American Politics and Campaign Technology, basically how to run a campaign. And I taught it at St. John's University. This was my background. I got into it. I know how this game is played. The game has to be played now. You don't go heavy. You go in and out. You go in and out. And then when the primaries are coming up in June, you start going very, very heavy around March and April. The people have short minds. All this stuff in the past isn't going to add up to anything. So if Kennedy runs the right kind of campaign, he could start beating Trump in the primary, Biden in the primaries. And I know that if he gets the Democratic nomination, he'll wipe Trump out.
I agree, but that's such a huge if. Can they really allow Bobby Kennedy to be the nominee? Wouldn't they try some Bernie Sanders type maneuvers to block that?
Oh, it'd be more than a Bernie Sanders type movement. It would be more like a JFK or an RFK movement. Poof, Jack, you're dead. What did Kennedy come out and say? The CIA who killed his father and his uncle. I have a photo, again, next time I'll show it to you. You know John Connally. John Connally was the Democratic governor of Texas that sat in front of Kennedy that took the bullet in the back. I have a photograph of me, John Connally, and his wife, Nellie, in front of the book depository, 1992, 2 weeks before the presidential election. He wanted to meet me. Because in one of my books, Trend Tracking, I had forecast in 89 that there'd be a new political party and someone like Ross Perot would be that guy. He wanted to meet me. I'm making a long story short. By the way, this was their first time back since the assassination. We're going back into the Anatole Hotel. And he said to me, you know, Gerald, I read your book. He said, a fine piece of work. And I know your heart's in the right place. He said, well, you don't have a clue what's going on. And neither do the American people. Because if they did, there'd be a revolution in this country. This isn't only the Connally that took the bullet in the back, sitting in front of JFK. This is the John Connally that became the Republican Treasury Secretary under Richard Nixon that took us off the gold standard. It's a crime syndicate that morons and imbeciles call a government. They have we had the 4th of July here a couple of weeks ago. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What the hell are you talking about? Happiness? Close down your business. I'm your mayor. I'm your governor. I'm the clown in charge. We're fighting the COVID war and stand 1 meter apart because the wind blows in straight lines exactly a meter. Doesn't go around, up and down. All right? It's all gone. It's a crime syndicate run by out of their mind, arrogant, narcissistic, pathological liars. End of story. And I was there. I was on the other side. By the way, it was the worst job I ever had in my life, and I quit after 1 year. Up in the Senate.
You're some man, Gerald Celente. As always, not just a pleasure, but a privilege to interview you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for all you do.
TrendsJournal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. God bless you. It's really, his work is actually a gold mine. Anybody interested in politics, political trends, economic trends, social trends, cultural trends, you have to follow him, Gerald Celente. I'll be right back after this short break.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that, at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Okay, get your calls in. I do hope that you'll look at the film that I made. The director, Sean Murray, a multiple award-winning director, an Irish man of note. I think that's the best cinema poster you're ever going to buy, and you can buy it from my shop. You can buy the DVD from my shop. You can buy or rent from Amazon. This is the anniversary. It's 20 years ago this week since the strange death of Dr. David Kelly. I'm very proud of the film, and I want more people to see it. Ghost of John Judge says, I want RFK, and I want him to appoint a courageous Attorney General to go after the people who murdered all of the great leaders of the 1960s. Amen. And phone numbers, let me give you them again, 08081965522 if you're in Britain or Ireland, in the US or Canada, +1 844 944 3344 if you're in the rest of the world, 44 203 966 2625. So many YouTube comments. I wish I could get through more of them. But my good friend and benefactor Ian Puddick says the head of MI6, aka C, said today that Ukraine had taken back more territory in the last month than Russia has in the last year. Good God, and this man's in charge of our intelligence. And Lars Svensson, great friend of the show, donated 200 Swedish crowns and says banks do everything but actual banking these days. I don't even know where to find a bank that will allow me to withdraw cash from my own account. And if I wish to deposit cash, I get treated like a criminal. Let's go to the lines. Raymond is in Wales, in Swansea. Wants to talk about Ukraine, though. Go ahead, Raymond.
Oh, good evening, George. I wanted to know, do you think the war in Ukraine will come to an end before the next US general election? Or do you think it'll still keep going?
Yeah. No, I think it will be over this year.
It'll be over this year. Well, because I hope so. Because I think you're already starting to see a lot of dissent anyway. Like Ben Wallace was saying before, he's not going to stand again. He's concerned about another world war.
That's right. The rats. Yeah, the rats are all jumping off the sinking ship, and more of them will. You wait till you see the result of the 3 English by-elections tomorrow, Raymond. There'll be a lot of rats headed for the Davy Jones locker after that. No, I think that the writing's on the wall. And, of course, in any such situation, once the once the last straw breaks the camel's back, there's no going back. It will be a headlong rush to liberate the territory, as I said earlier, east of the river and all along the coastline. So the whole south and the whole east of Ukraine will be in a different political entity from Kiev by the end of this year. That's my prediction. Last word to you, Remy.
I can't see Ukraine being a country after this, even if there's like half of it left. Because anything
It'll be a stump.
South of Belarus.
It'll be a stump. Yeah, it'll be a stump like the Kosovo. That's my take. Raymond, thanks for the call, mate.
Thanks for giving me a voice. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome, mate. Let's go to Cheshire, where Wayne wants to talk about the cashless society. Go ahead, Wayne. Wayne, you there? Wayne.
Hello?
Wayne. Yes, Wayne, go ahead. You're on the air.
Is it, George? Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Basically, there's two quick things, really. I don't know whether you're in the UK and seen the news today, but the head of MI6 was on asking the Russian soldiers to defect, and we would welcome them with open arms. Number two,
yeah, I saw that.
Is 2006, my wife and I went bankrupt, and they shut the bank accounts down, so the judge in Chambers gave us a letter to take to the bank so we could get a bank account, just a small one, just to pay bills, etc. Anyway, so we went down to town, went in all the banks. They said, no, you can't have one. And they said, that's a verbal agreement, it's not legal. So we used cash for 12 months. But what I'm trying to get at is, in them days, we could pay the bills through prepayment cards. Now, the companies which are doing them are closing down. And what's worst is now, because the government have said that the electricity and gas companies can't charge extra for prepaid meters, that they're being phased out. So if I was bankrupt today, I wouldn't be able to get a bank account. Even if I had cash, I wouldn't be able to pay the bills, and I would be on the streets.
Yeah, it's unconscionable, intolerable. If you've got the Queen's legal tender or the King's now legal tender in your pocket, no one should be able to refuse to take it. It's an absurdity. I mean, I'm so old, I remember when some places were reluctant to take a card. Now you're getting places that say no cash. And for anything substantial like a bill, a utility bill or whatever, you try paying that in cash. You try turning up at the office with the pound coins to pay your bill. This is intolerable. And we mustn't let it get to the point of no return. Because if we do, we'll be prisoners in our own homes, in our own lives, in our own country for the rest of time. Unless they decide to non-person us and effectively ghost us. I wonder where they'd start with that. Let's go to Tony in Worcestershire on the same subject. Can we? Tony, are you there?
Hello, George. Good evening. And best
evening. Go ahead, sir.
You and your family, George. It's been a while since we last spoke, and that was during the heady days of Jeremy Corbyn, when you and I discussed whether they would allow him to succeed. Well, we know the answer to that one. George,
yes.
Thank you so much for your continued stance against imperialism and for world peace. I've been on the left of politics, George, for all of my adult life. But like a previous guest of yours, James Melville, I feel that the left have deserted me and that I haven't deserted the left. None more so than during the so-called pandemic and lockdown. I understand and applaud those workers who continue to struggle those workers such as the RMT struggle, the teachers and the doctors at the moment. But I can't help but feel we need to join some dots. If any struggle succeeds in getting workers a decent pay rise and better working conditions, and it's a big but how will we fare under, let's say, the central bank digital currency? And I know that there's been a couple of callers, and you yourself have covered this evening, and I was so pleased that you did. It's linked, as far as I'm concerned, George, to something else you've talked about in the past, and that's the agenda of the World Economic Forum. And also now the World Health Organization, with its treaty, which, as I understand, the EU have ratified along with many other governments, or as Gerald Celente eloquently put it a few minutes ago at the criminal clubs. It's a treaty that hands government control to the World Health Organization. It will make membership of the EU like a tea party, I feel. I also feel, George, that we need a national campaign against the central bank digital currency. Can we imagine what it would be like to be? I think Farage was a test. If they can do it to him, they will do it to many others. The likes of Mick Lynch, when Mick is speaking against what they're trying to do and the attacks on the people that he represents. I can imagine trade union funds being captured. I can imagine people like Mick Lynch being targeted as an individual, and other trade unions and trade union leaders along with him. This is how they will get control. I firmly believe, and I'm one of the few people from the left who spoke out against the lies that they told us during the pandemic and how it was used to control people. I believe that was also a test, and I believe it's linked to the World Economic Forum's agenda, and I believe we're going to face many things like it in the future. If we can stop the central bank digital currency, we will stop them in their tracks, and it will be a big blow.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the editor is clipping this call as we speak and putting it in a glass case, and you'll be seeing and hearing much more. It was a masterpiece, a master class in analysis. I won't try and better it. I would just say this, that they might well attack Mick Lynch. I cannot think of any other trade union leader that would be worthwhile them attacking. But I can think of many trade union leaders who'll probably be on the side of the attackers. But I'm ready to take alternative points of view. If you've got a view on the digital currency, cashless society, the NigelFarage, give me a quick call, 08081 965522. Or +1 844 944 3344. On the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Now, Ellie says on an email, in 2007, the late Aaron Russo, Bette Midler's manager, had a long discussion with Alex Jones about how the Rockefellers planned the cashless society. Thank you, Ellie. And Croaky says, can't get excited about RFKJr because of his stance on Israel-Palestine. He needs to strike a better balance, even if he's pro-Israel. Well, actually, his stance on Israel-Palestine is utterly unhinged. It's not a question of unbalanced. It is unhinged. It is worse than any other American politician, bar none, and for the last 3 decades, it is worse than virtually all of the Israeli political class itself. It's worse than Haaretz. It's worse than Gideon Beit Salem. It's worse than the Israelis out on the street getting water canned by Netanyahu's mob. This evening it's worse than any, literally unhinged. And that troubles me greatly. Of course, how could it be otherwise with my 50 years now and more of involvement in this question? But if I can support Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so can you. Because the world is not just the Israel-Palestine question. It's about stopping World War III. It's about stopping America's endless wars. It's about bringing the American armed forces home. It's about scattering the CIA and the FBI. It's about changing the balance of power vis the military-industrial complex. It's about all the other parts. His attacks on Big Pharma and their tyranny and so on. It's about all of these things. So me, I'm turning a Nelson's eye for now to his Israel-Palestine mania. It is a mania. I've no idea where it comes from. I cannot imagine what lies beneath it. It's certainly not for votes, because it's going to cost him far more votes than it could ever gain him, because the people who think like him about Israel are never going to vote for him because of his views on all these other issues that I mentioned. So it's actually an act of political self-harm. Neither is it money. First of all, Israel doesn't give people money. Israel takes money. It doesn't give it. And Bobby Kennedy has no need of money. Absolutely no. He's as rich as Croesus. And of course, there are millions of people in the music industry, in the film industry, in the cultural creative sectors, in the economy, in liberal America, in Massachusetts, where the family was ensconced, was based, and so on. There'll be no shortage of money. Kennedy will romp home in New Hampshire in the first primary. He will romp home. He will rout Joe Biden. And he may well win the second primary with a slightly greater, lesser margin. And then they're up against real serious problems in trying to stop him, especially if Joe keeps falling asleep in prime time with world statesmen sitting next to him. Michael Butler asks, when are you going to get Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson on your show? I know you want to. Of course I want to. If you know them, give them my telephone number. Quick break. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. We are led by a conspiracy of liars and killers who are ready to kill every last Ukrainian as long as they can keep the Russian war machine occupied and learn from it, sell weapons to their own side, and bring about the destruction of the European Union's own economy. This means we're led by criminals, not fools, but criminals who know the truth but tell the lies, who are ready to see significant numbers of people die for their lies. Now, this has been true before. It was obviously true in the Iraq War, but it has not been true on such a systematic, concerted basis as we are now experiencing. And the man who said it best said it to the largest television audience ever known on Twitter. Tucker Carlson, which was the biggest audience on Fox News by a country mile, would have spoken it to 3.5 million people. on an ordinary weekday. Instead, he spoke it on Elon Musk's Twitter, not sponsored by Pfizer or Big Pharma or the military-industrial complex, not sponsored by any commercial entity. Just Tucker Carlson speaking directly to camera. That's the future of television. Directly, online, like this, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble, on Instagram. Everywhere you can get it is the future of television. Elon Musk paid a lot of money for Twitter, but he has repaid, at least in part, any debt that he had to the rest of us by putting Tucker Carlson in front of what will turn out to be, I hazard a guess, in excess of 100 million people. And he spoke some very important truths. So when you're finished watching the mother of all talk shows, if you have not yet done so, you have to watch Tucker Carlson on Twitter. But stay here meantime, because we've got some cracking guests and, of course, your phone calls.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Some great Patreon comments. Martin Higgins. I'm a huge fan of RFKJr and agree with most of what he says, but in the cold light of day, do you think his voice will go against his success? I've just listened to the podcast with Joe Rogan, and I'm ashamed to admit I find him a bit difficult to listen to. Your thoughts, Gigi? It's a fair point, Martin. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. A voice is an important thing in politics. I think that people will get used to it and get past it. I definitely prefer to read what he says rather than listen to it. But his passion somehow comes through on the issues that he's passionate about. And, you know, FDR got elected in a wheelchair, and people knew he was in a wheelchair, even though he was never put on the screen. Matthew White says, listening to Moats on a Wednesday and Sunday is about the only way to stay sane across any given 7-day period. Graham Briggs White says, nobody is better off as the price of everything has gone up, yet they can pay for the upkeep of an unnecessary, stupid proxy war. Congratulations, George, on Chris Williamson joining the Workers' Party of Britain. Thanks for everything, Graham. You are a big, big friend. Daniela Modascotter, another big friend, says, yes, I'm much worse off than last year, as I'm on disability benefits due to an accident at work a few years ago. The world is tired of this proxy war. Now, Derek has emailed the show. I was wondering why the bank was stupid enough to pick on somebody like Farage, but I think Tony just explained it. Let's go to the lines. Matthew is in West London commenting on our poll. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, George. I'm here to do penance. I'm one of those 28% of people that's doing pretty well. Who report that's doing pretty well. So I thought to prostrate myself before you. And,
but are you doing better? It's good that you're doing pretty well. I like people doing well. But how come you're better off this year than last, when inflation is running riot, when energy costs are what they are, when mortgage payments have doubled, even trebled in some people's cases? How are you better off this year than last?
The truth is, George, it's dumb luck. I happen to be working in a sector that's one of the few sectors that's doing okay, IT/technology. So that's one of those few areas that's still got some good profit margins doing our companies. But that's a matter purely of where I'm placed, rather than any merit on my part. But, well, it's been a good year. Hopefully I've done good work over the past year, but I can't claim control over the economy as a whole.
Yeah, and you're not denying, I know, just how hard your fellow countrymen and women have now got it. It's only about 10 weeks to the winter, and I think people are looking towards that winter with very severe trepidation, don't you?
100%. I mean, I'm originally a working class kid. My was raised mostly by my aunt, and God bless her soul, she's worked 45 years in the same factory, and ever since they busted the unions in the 80s and shut down the closed shops and all that, it's just the pay rises have never really come through for her. And ultimately, she's barely, in real terms, her pay's not gone up for at least 20 years now. It's disgusting. She's making, I would estimate probably £15,000 a year for 35 good hours of work a week. It's disgusting how rapacious this is, like that. So many, the factory owners are in that regard. I did want to pivot a little bit from anecdote, though, George, because I want to talk just share some quick thoughts I've had on the Coutts shutting down Farage's bank account, if you'll forgive the indulgence.
Yeah.
I took some time to go over the subject access requests that Farage obtained, where the Coutts people went over, why they shut him out of his account. And one thing that really stood out for me, alongside the Russia-hating nonsense, was the fact that one of the major conflict of values they cited was Farage's opposition to net zero and climate change catastrophism. It's made me ask a question of something I've thought about for quite a while. Why is it that so many of these elites, these financial elites, pay Farage so much, despite him being, by his own admission, being virtually a Thatcherite? I almost think that there's something that this commitment to net zero is an interesting through line. Because these are financial capitalists, people whose wealth and status is tied to institutions that don't really create anything. They don't build anything. They just move other people's money around and take a cut of it. And Farage, he's an ex-commodity trader, is something different to them. He bought and traded metals. That's gauche to these people. They think it's kind of disgusting, lowly, as opposed to, manipulating mortgage rates at scale and other nonsense like that. In their eyes, he's the last political ally of the industrial capitalists. The dwindling remnants of the elite whose wealth and status actually came from building and creating things. And those executives at Coutts, the elites of the city, the media, the civil service, they hate these people. Because for all that can be said about these industrialists, and much should be said about these industrialists, they actually want to grow the pie and create wealth. And the bankers don't really care. They don't mind a shrinking pie where they have a large share of it. Net zero is a big legitimate ideology for these people. It excuses degrowth, which effectively screws over much of the working class in the Western world, alongside the development of the global South and developing countries. It's a religious ideology that justifies the fact that they stay wealthy, they stay at the top, they keep their big slice of the pie at the expense of economic growth and development for everybody else. And Nigel Farage, he's representative of that small, dwindling block of elites in the West, very small, that ultimately try and want to actually do some development. It's not an equitable development, but it's development nonetheless. And I think that's the through line. This hate, the net zero stuff, the hatred of Russia, which, for all its faults, is largely still a commodity-producing country, an industrialized country. These financial capitalists, they don't want any of that. They just want to extract and maintain high status relative to everybody else. That's the through line, I think, and that's my ultimate reason for calling up.
Well, I've got to tell you, it's one of the best calls I've ever heard. I think the ontology you rolled out is absolutely correct. I think that much can be explained by listening, replaying your phone call, your analysis. I demur only on this. I don't know Farage all that well, but I know that he was pretty keen to get that job at GB News, and GB News does not ignore. From that I infer that Farage is not all that wealthy. Businesses don't pay him. He has ground a bit at LBC, for example, which also does not pay great money, although he was getting more than your normal presenter on LBC would get. Ditto at GB News. He's probably everybody else, but that's not much to say if you get my drift. So I'm assuming that the capitalists, like Coutts and co, who hate him for his opposition to net zero, for his opposition to all the quackery and greenery that the globalized finance capitalists have made their own religion, they definitely don't pay him. And the number of, if you like, as you characterized it, industrial capitalists who are ready to pay a guy like Farage, I think they must be small in number and shy of association with Farage. I don't mean to say he's poor. He's far richer than me, but he's by no means rich. And that is of significance and interest, because you're absolutely right. Whilst I have spent my whole life opposing industrial capitalists and standing on picket lines outside their plants and so on, at least they were trying to make things. At least they were trying to grow the economy, and especially their share of it. These other speculators, gamblers, casino economic, blackjack merchants, these money changers, money lenders, these people don't care about making things. They're quite happy for China to make the things, as long as they can keep their position in control of our part of the globalized capitalist system. And the media that they employ, with the exception of GB News, and obviously programs like this, people as it were off the grid, but increasingly attracting far bigger audiences. Our audience compared to GB News is gigantic compared to GB News. Even Farage. More people watch this show than watch Farage. More people watch this show than watch the entire output of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV in an entire week. But of the terrestrial media, only GB News, representing exactly the sectors of British society that you just adumbrated, takes anything like a disparate view to the overwhelming corporate media, which is gung-ho for war, gung-ho for all the greenery and quackery, and especially the greenbacks that come with it. A great call, Matthew. I'm sorry if I took too long to respond to it. So many comments on Gerald Celente's interview. Christine Peach says Gerald sure cuts to the chase. He does that. On the truth about many current politicians. Some people cannot handle that. Maybe someday they'll smarten up. And Jay Topo says Gerald is a valuable asset to us all. Spades have always been spades with Gerald Celente. Okay, just time for two more calls, and one of them disagrees with me. So we better put him on. It's Nathan in Seattle. Go ahead, Nathan. Say your piece.
Thanks for having me. I wanted to comment on some of the reflections you had on digital currencies. I noticed, it's a trend. A lot of people who hate the idea of a CBDC also didn't like when people like Justin Trudeau shut down the accounts of the truckers. And I can assume that you're on that side as well.
Yes.
Well, like Justin Trudeau said, people who went against his his choice to do that are racist. Not only racist, also sexist, homophobic, puppy haters. And he speaks with experience because he's the first black prime minister of Canada. Now, I understand some of the concerns people have about the CBDCs, but I think we can be using them properly to investigate what billionaires are spending our money on. So I don't think like your common Joe Schmo, barely making paycheck to paycheck should be investigated. They don't have enough money to do big bad things. But billionaires who take more than their fair share of our taxes, I think we should know where they're spending their money. I don't think they should be able to accumulate multiple billions of dollars as well. But I would like to know where the people who go to Epstein Island, where they're spending their money. Are they buying hitmen? Who paid for the Jeffrey Epstein's suicide? You know, I want to know where that money is going. And I think like if you take more than $1 billion from the U.S. or any government, like you're engaging in fascism, and there needs to be total transparency on all of your finances. So I'm not for CBDCs for the lower rung of society, but yes, billionaires, I definitely would like to know where all of their money is going. And I would like to just change the argument from no CBDCs to let's find out where these billionaires are spending all of our money.
Brilliant call, Nathan, in Seattle. And many apologies to all of those who did not get through, particularly TJ, our first woman caller of the evening, who was to be the last caller, but we now have no time for her. TJ, please accept my sincere apologies and please call the show on Sunday, and I promise you will be first up. There's no time for my final thoughts and ruminations. I'm already over the time, and I'll have to pay people a full hour for going an hour, a minute and a half afterwards. And it's difficult these days for me to do it. So accept my apologies if you did not get through. If I spoke too long in response to some of the callers, a double apology for that. I'll be back, of course, God willing, on Sunday at the earlier time of 7 p.m. UK time. Please remember the time difference. So 7 p.m. UK time on Sunday. The mothership, the mother of all talk shows. Another 1 million+ audience over the last 7 days, but not yet 2 million. And I won't be satisfied until I'm able to say the word 2 every week at the end of the show. Thanks for joining me.